As popular as the Marvel movie craze has become, it's wild to think that Marvel pulled it off almost entirely without the help of the characters that made it all possible. Marvel's first family, the Fantastic Four. In 1961, before Spider Man, the Hulk, Iron Man, Thor, and even the X-Men existed, Stan Lee was advised by his publisher Martin Goodman to create a super team that would rival the recent success of DC's Justice League of America. Lee was so disillusioned at this point with the industry that he was ready to call it quits, but he gave it one last shot with legendary co-creator Jack Kirby, and together they created a smash hit new breed of heroes who had day lives, wrestled with celebrity and insecurities and infighting, and had to learn how to deal with one another to remain a family, and a team capable of fending off alien invasions and traveling to new dimensions. The Fantastic Four resurrected Stan Lee's career and jump-started the Marvel Age of comics. As a kid, I too fell in love with how well the team complemented one another, as well as their space-age optimism and the variety of their adventures. They were, and are to this day, my very favorite super team. But I'd never strayed past the comics, because the movies looked so bad, and somehow I'd never played any Fantastic Four games in the aughts. So with the First Steps movie upon us, I figured it was high time to go back and see what I was missing by playing all of the Fantastic Four games, and letting you know if they're worth remembering. And considering I've never heard anything one way or another about these games, this may hurt. So as Ben Grimm would say,
it's clobbering time!
So, the Fantastic Four's video game history starts off in a rather unusual way. Developed by Adventure International for various home computers, 1985's Questprobe, featuring the Human Torch and the Thing, featured only two of the team's members, and wasn't exactly the action game many would expect. Adventure International boldly chose to eschew the comic's full-on cosmic hero sci-fi pulp and turned it into a haunted house-style tech strategy game in the vein of Zork or Colossal Cave Adventure. Considering that this was the company's third and final Questprobe game before going bankrupt, you can probably imagine how this is going to go. So the way the game works is that you essentially have 8 turns and a set amount of strength or energy to perform certain actions that solve logic puzzles so that you can finish the game and save Alicia Masters from Doctor Doom. You can switch between the torch and the thing at any time, and certain actions you choose take up more energy than others, so you can use a turn to rest and save up for bigger actions that you think might lead to victory. The kicker here is that there's no real way to know which combinations of character switching and actions are objectively better than others, so it's all trial and error until you make it through. These are less logic puzzles and more moon logic puzzles, as you have to hope you're thinking along the same lines as the developers. For instance, getting the thing out of the tar pit is your first priority, as it must be handled very specifically before your turns run out or it's game over. But as the Adventurers Guild blog writer notes, the thing is heavier than the 150-pound limit that the torch can carry, so we can't pick him up and fly him out, but even though supposedly the thing's biography says he can handle extreme temperatures, we can't set the tar on fire and hope that the game lets us destroy it and get him out that way, as the thing dies from the heat. So you've got to keep poking around in hopes of finding the Goldilocks route. And if that weren't enough hassle, none of this strategy even matters if you don't know or aren't having any success entering the small range of acceptable commands into the game to make the story advance. See, there aren't any dialogue trees or anything like that. You have to manually type in commands like flame on and flame on how much, like flame on nova or medium, or feel around or go north. But each branch of the game only has a couple acceptable choices, if not just one. Starting the game only has one acceptable choice, for instance, and later the thing has to hold his breath in the tar pit in hopes that the Human Torch's actions elsewhere will save him before the turn timer runs out. Now, I assumed that based on a walkthrough that I'd read, that a list of acceptable commands was in the manual somewhere to give you, some chance of figuring out what the game would accept, but I was sorely mistaken. The game hints at what types of commands are going to work, but gives no specifics, which is crazy talk even for an archaic old 80s game. So before I found this helpful walkthrough of commands, I just sat there feverishly trying to prod the game console to make something new happen, even getting some rather hilarious responses when I got a little bawdy with my prompts. Fuck your mother. I don't know how to fuck. Let's just say I didn't last very long with this incredibly arbitrary experience, whose misery was compounded even more by the incredibly loud and harsh sound effects. As Derek Brewster for Crash wrote at the time of release,
"This third release shows little care for what the British adventure market wants. And I think it's unlikely that people are that interested in mind-bogglingly difficult games constructed in such an uncaring fashion."
I'd say that sums it up pretty well. It's a novel idea that this Questprobe experiment exists in the first place. This is neither a reasonable use of your time, nor is it a particularly fitting adaptation of the comics. It'd be 12 years before a team tried again to do the Fantastic Four justice. The simply named Fantastic Four for the PlayStation was developed by Probe Entertainment and published by Acclaim Entertainment in 1997 for the PlayStation. Like many 90s superhero games, it's a side-scrolling brawler that could be played with up to 4 players in co-op. If you're playing on your lonesome like I did, you can go into the options settings and select which of the 5 starting heroes, including She-Hulk, that you would like to play as, and which other 3 you would like to accompany you. Whichever one you don't choose, you can pause the game and switch to in most situations, which is a nice touch. Just make sure you turn on the drones in the option menu too, or else you'll accidentally play the entire game completely by yourself instead of with bots. The vibe is immaculate, as the unconventional but totally welcome jazz soundtrack comes down like a Saturday Night Live episode
to pump you up
as you punch through enemies in your standard setup of light attack, heavy attack, jump, and block. You can also hold down a modifier button and use the D-pad in various combinations to do combos, or so I'm told. I could really only get the Thing to charge and do his jump slam attack, and the She-Hulk to do her spinning kick, but none of the other combos I saw really ever seemed to work, unfortunately. The combat's not stellar, as it's not very responsive and it has that annoying brawler thing where it's hard to judge whether enemies are directly in front of you on the plane or even close enough to you to get hit by your attacks. If you get through a stage without losing any lives, you can unlock an end-level boss fight against the Hulk, Iceman, or Dragon Man. These are cool if fairly random inclusions in theory, but they're deeply unfair in a way that the bosses from the Death and Return of Superman were, as they bombard you with special attacks and are almost impossible to down since you're all by your lonesome. I bring special attention to them because they're a bit of a microcosm of how the game barrages you with inputs that are often too numerous to block effectively. Thankfully though, your AI companions will beat the tar out of most enemies, but their competency actually cost me the ability to progress at one point. Nearly all the bosses in this game require you to pick up grunts and throw them at the boss to damage them, but your AI companions kill them so quickly that they're often not around long enough to be thrown, and the only way to throw the enemies is to pick them up and kind of throw them backwards, so you have to both grab them before they're defeated and also have the exact angle and distance away from the boss to successfully pull off a damaging throw. It's incredibly awkward and poorly balanced, and because it took so long to line this up, my AI teammates kept dying from boss attacks and eating up all my lives, so that even when I got through this stage eventually, there was no feasible way to get through the rest of the game with 1 life. Scroll World is where I had to stop, so let's pick up where I left off and see where the game goes from there. This is a good time to talk level design because it's okay. The levels look very fantastical and colorful, with fun details like being able to throw these werewolf men into lava pits to do away with them. I do really like how futuristic the Scroll World looks, for instance. There are also some delightfully ridiculous details like how the aquatic forces of Namor the Submariner show up, and then you're fighting bipedal whales and Nightmare Before Christmas rejects. Getting to fight Namor is a huge plus, but fighting him in a canyon of sorts is not exactly a good showing of his abilities. Namor tells us we shouldn't be fighting, and that Atlantis is in as much danger as the rest of the world.
Listen to me. I'm not behind this aquatic attack. Atlantis is also in grave danger. You've got to come and help. Listen to me. I'm not behind this aquatic attack. Atlantis is also in grave danger. You've got to come and help. Listen to me. I'm not behind this aquatic attack. Atlantis is also in grave danger. You've got to come and help.
Shut up! Shut up!
The Fantastic Four agree, and Mr. Fantastic creates a time machine to go back to the root of your problems in Doomstadt. So that means a meeting with the good doctor is due. We get to tour the cutest little German town full of drawbridges and quaint folksy architecture, all the way to the throne room of our arch nemesis, Dr. Doom.
The Fantastic Four. I'm glad you could finally drop in on me.
That's it. I've had enough of this guy.
You started a massacre!
I caused the revolution.
You betray the law!
Doom looks the part, though his moveset is surprisingly limited, and he's not got much going on in terms of spectacle like our bespectacled buddy the Mole Man did earlier. What the hell? Okay, I stand corrected. Game automatically good now. I was clearly mistaken. I also have to commend the devs on their honoring of Fantastic Four lore, as the Mole Man is the first villain they've ever faced, and he's the first boss here. He's kind of a hoot to throw his little minions back at him to knock him out of his ship and then finish him off, although he suffers a bit from the same problem I mentioned earlier, where grabbing grunts before the AI gets to them and also lining up a throw is super clunky. But how well overall does this one fare? I mean, it's got good vibes and a great comic book feel, and I love the inclusion of the little-known one Fantastic Four member She-Hulk here, trying to give me a big women fetish, and there are some cute additions like doing this little racing minigame during loading screens. But it is a brawler through and through, and not a particularly complex or good one. It's fun for a bit, but it gets pretty daggum repetitive. It's also not balanced very well, and the game is too easy with AI teammates, and then it actually gets too hard in the boss fights because their competence keeps you from engaging the gimmicks needed to defeat the boss. Greg Fischbosch, the CEO of publisher Acclaim Entertainment, is noted as saying that he could tell during development that this game wasn't turning out very well, but they were compelled by contractual obligations to see it through, so that pretty much sums up my feelings here too. It's by no means the worst game of all time, as IGN dared posit, but it is a pale imitation of Final Fight and other games like it, wrapped in a licensed sheen. As it stands though, there are much worse games out there, so I call this an uneven but certainly not egregious first fighting game for the Fantastic Four. It would be 8 more years before the Fantastic Four reared their heads again, and this time it was on the last legs of the 6th generation of consoles in 2005 for the PS2, Xbox, GameCube, and Game Boy Advance, a version I'll also cover. Developer 7 Studios was incredibly excited to make this project.
We literally danced around the office. We were so excited.
I run into people and they say, yeah, there's the stretchy guy, yeah, and the fire guy, but really there's Ben Grimm, who's the big rock, the orange guy. He's really the tank of the group. Reed Richards, who a lot of people confuse me with, he is the leader of the group. He's the brains behind the organization. And then there's Johnny Storm, who also is known as Johnny Flame.
Johnny Flame? This has never been a name that Johnny Storm or the Human Torch has been known by. What are you even saying, Louis? Okay, so I don't know what to do with somebody who says they're a diehard fan of somebody and then makes up a nickname for them, but they do seem enthusiastic, and I think it really shows here. The Fantastic Four has every reason to be terrible, as it is a rushed movie tie-in with the 2005 movie. Now, I loved a lot of these licensed movie tie-in games like Van Helsing, Constantine, and King Kong that were all surprisingly decent considering how mercenary their rushed development schedules probably were. The Fantastic Four, despite its middling reviews at the time's release, is no different, and in fact maybe a lot better than people give it credit for, so let's get into it. The game's story follows the skeleton of the movie's plot, but adds in quite a few diversions for better and worse. Our story begins with a modified origin story from the comics. Our heroes are a band of astronauts led by Reed Richards and Sue Storm, who are hot for each other, and joined by Sue's brother Johnny and everyone's mutual pal Ben Grimm. They're granted access to Dr. Victor Von Doom's space station to test the effects of cosmic space rays on living organisms, and ironically they find out just how that works, as the mission goes pear-shaped and the entire team and Victor Von Doom are exposed to these rays, each gaining new powers in the process. They try to reverse this process through several missions over the course of the game, but it's all for naught. Due to the accident and ensuing set of failures, as well as his jealousy of Reed gaining Sue's affections, Victor slowly starts to lose it, and he vows to use his emerging metallic skin and electrical abilities as Dr. Doom to exact revenge on the Fantastic Four. Wait a minute. I just noticed my script calls him Dr. Droom for some reason. Okay. Now, the plot justifies its wild diversions into space and other dimensions pretty well, rationalizing that in order for Reed to be able to reverse their conditions, he's got to find some pretty rare specimens and pull off some heavy-duty experiments. Now, I buy it because who doesn't want to fight giant spiders and rock monsters and such? It's not incredibly Fantastic Four, it feels more like God of War or something, but hey, it's the thought that counts. What does feel perfectly right is the voice cast. Ioan Gruffudd was genetically bred to play Reed Richards, and he does a great job capturing Reed's nerdy, detail-oriented, and capable presence, although he's the only character who feels like he's mixed way too low most of the time.
The cosmic rays have altered our DNA somehow. We need to know more right now. No.
Pre-Captain America Chris Evans uses that dude bro voice crack to the fullest here. Just check out his drip. And Michael Chiklis of The Shield is excellent as the Thing, capturing his working color moodiness and vulnerability and loyalty perfectly. I mean, seriously, look how good this guy is in the studio and how much fun he's having.
It's clobbering time! It's clobbering time.
How can you not like this guy? Jessica Alba's deeply miscast as Sue Storm, but at least if you can't see her incredibly unnatural blonde look from the movie, she's perfectly reasonable to listen to. The late great Julian McMahon does his damnedest to Doom with aplomb here, and it's fun to see how muted his accent is here in the behind the scenes as opposed to his last couple interviews where he was, full-on Australian. From the team's call-outs and playful banter with one another in-game, to the campy monologues from the supporting cast of villains and the excellent orchestral soundtrack, there's a deeply authentic and fun tone throughout, and it really carries the experience.
Does that include the ever-loving blue-eyed thing?
Now, that's not to say the gameplay is shabby by any means. The team's leader, Reed Richards, can stretch out and smack guys from a distance or spin super fast to bowl over groups of enemies, and that's when he's not throwing out spider bots to blow up for big damage. Reed's also the only team member who can pull off the hacking minigame or stretch to faraway areas to unlock the way forward. Sue can shield herself for a teammate, and sometimes puzzles require it, and she can telekinetically grab enemies and throw them around or strike them with invisible projectiles, and whatever the power is that she's wielding over me when she walks around with that thing. Johnny can fly around and throw fireballs or flame throw, and the thing can charge or slam down with the best of them. All of these powers consume energy, and your reserves are replenished by pickups after defeating enemies or breaking apart parts of the environment. This way you've got access to the powers without feeling like the enemy has no chance. Now, part of the reason it feels so much better here is that the melee combat, which has numerous different combos for each character, is actually pretty decent, if fairly simple and a bit repetitive over time. The timings are a bit dodgy, mind you, but the impact and the feedback effects sonically and visually are really satisfying. The combos that do work, though, are when you activate your powers alongside your teammates for collaborative carnage that'll cause the Fantastic Four to fantastically wipe the floor with the bad guys. There are also context-sensitive actions that only a specific team member can pull off, like Sue using her telekinesis to hold up a falling building, or Reed stretching across gaps or hacking terminals, Johnny burning through sealed doors, or the Thing pulling down fire escapes to take out the Yancey street gang, who aren't just kids anymore as they were in the comics, but full-fledged gangstas. Overall, the team controls well, and they're fun to switch between with faithful and interesting recreations of their powers. Though I'll admit that each character really only has one power that you'll want to use over and over, like Reed's spinning punches or Ben's shockwave attack, which can make the action a little samey after a while as you just opt for the clear best option over and over as your energy gauge allows. Now, I will admit that Johnny and Sue do have melee combos that really supplement their powers and are great to lean on, though this has the same problem of discouraging the use of the whole swath of abilities that Seven Studios put together. I'm also surprised at how Sue's invisibility and telekinesis comes up like maybe once or twice in the whole game. She definitely feels like the most underutilized and underdeveloped character, and Reed's not very good outside of his spin attack. Johnny's balanced well enough as his melee attacks suck, but he's a ranged beast. But I noticed that the game biases you towards the durability and high DPS of the Thing more often than not. Speaking of things, there are a couple of things that I didn't jive with as much. Each character can block, but they have to stand still to do so, and often the attacks you'd want to block get you stun locked if you ever let your guard down, so you're only delaying the inevitable. It can be really difficult to get close to certain enemies because of this. If you ever get stuck in a crowd, you're often going to be unable to get out because the block really doesn't do anything, and some enemies can really put out far more damage than you have ways to counteract. I found out late game that I've been missing a dodge function the whole time, but even that only got me away from these guys temporarily and never let me actually retaliate, just, not get hit. Many enemies also take way too much damage to go down, so it can make the action even more repetitive than it already is. Another aspect I wish was different was how seldom we actually have the whole team together. Now, perhaps it was a console limitation at the time, but rarely are you able to switch between all four characters, and you're often just controlling pairs that work in tandem across levels to set the other pair up for success. But otherwise, the game does simulate the teamwork that the Fantastic Four are known for. The team's power suite is well realized and balanced, so it's hard to hold that against Seven Studios, and the game's pairing idea also works well for the local co-op that you could play back in the day, and Seven Studios got a real kick out of how teammates would troll each other just like the Torch and the Thing might do in the comics. So even though the game not supporting the full team is disappointing, when you do get to take control of these guys, it's a pretty good time. You'll get to journey to a space station to fight off sentient plant monsters, or battle reanimated mummies, and ancient Egyptian gods like Horus, or even travel to the Negative Zone to take on Annihilus and later Blastar. I do think the game could have benefited from using more actual Fantastic Four villains though, as the Puppet Master's shown here, but never given anything naughty to do, and there are quite a few generic monsters here.
Next time, Fantastic Fools, the Puppet Master will not fail.
Perhaps it was a funding or a rights issue that, would have eaten up the game's budget to adapt anymore.
You can put it on my tab, bub.
But either way, there's at least a decent mix here like the Plasma Worm, and certainly most of it's in keeping with the Fantastic Four's diverse and pulpy sci-fi space-age Rose Gallery, even if it feels at times like these are enemies that could have just been in any other video game and not necessarily a Fantastic Four adaptation. The game's lasting appeal will still likely be for true fans of the comics. I know that this game got something like a 5 or a 6 out of 10 in most review outlets back in 2005, but I can't say that I had that feeling. Maybe I just like a low-maintenance good time these days, being a grumpy old bastard drunk on nostalgia. But for me, I think it's going to be exactly what director and CEO Louis Peterson wanted out of the game.
One of my goals in Fantastic Four, the game, was to make it into a collector's item. Not only a game that lasts with the extra features, all the work, all the little touches. It's something that if somebody really loves Fantastic Four, they're going to want to have on their shelf because they're going to refer back to it and have that sort of a piece of history. Comic book history is one of the things we're trying to accomplish.
Now, he may have no idea what the Human Torch's name or nickname actually is, but I appreciate that he wanted to make a game that would hold up as a superfan's collector's item that they'd want on their shelf. And if this game wasn't readily available on an emulator, I definitely want it on my shelf.
I hope so.
Let's not wait around to find out.
Agreed.
Not only that, but playing the game actually finally made me interested in seeing the 2005 movie, which is saying something since I was willing to avoid it on reputation alone for all these years. So overall, the Fantastic Four game of 2005 just drips with authenticity, and there's even some unlockable levels that you can play in Latveria and Hell, so there's plenty of reasons to replay or extend your playtime here, especially if you're a longtime Fantastic Four fanatic.
I hope so.
Now, where fans may only dare to tread is the Game Boy version of the game that came out in the same year. It follows the console versions very closely, though of course it is much simpler and is an isometric style brawler. There's no block button here, and there are no combos. You've got an even more streamlined game than even the console versions, which tended to just make you alternate between the best power until your energy ran out, and then use your best melee combo until that recharged. You'll need to balance your lives here and not get too greedy, and make sure you pick up the energy or health resources as appropriate when controlling multiple characters to make sure each one of their health and energy resources are topped off at all times. There are some weird choices here though, like how the Invisible Woman can turn into a Tasmanian Devil style tornado and spin around the level doing damage. This makes no sense with her power suite and looks like a reskinned ability that Reed should be doing. Now, perhaps this is because Reed is so much better than he was in the main game, though that's partially because enemies die so fast as opposed to being sponges in the console version. The Thing's just doing what he did in the main game, but Johnny, despite having cool looking powers, isn't as effective as he could be because his attacks are really hard to aim. I also wish the AI was better, as they walk right into laser traps that cost you precious lives sometimes. The boss fights are also atrocious, with enemies that can heal themselves like Blastar and only randomly seem to take damage like Diablo, or who are incredibly hard to damage because dumbass Johnny is so hard to get his attacks lined up so he can throw fireballs to hit the mole man across a gap. The bosses require so many exploits or getting lucky to beat them, because your AI teammates are almost inert most of the time, and they're no real help until the last fight, where you essentially have to keep switching to whomever Doom is attacking and block indefinitely while the AI pelts him with damage. And even then, I had to stun lock the son of a gun to get him to go down. Overall, the action's fine, I guess, but it is very repetitive. Although I got a kick out of flame belching on fools, or smacking them senseless with my bendy arms at the Thing's shockwave. Sue can go full invisible here, which is neat, but there's no real reason to do so unless you're just trying to bully the game by running through every door and avoiding all the enemies, which you could definitely do, and will probably want to as the combat never evolves. The level variety is just about as good as the main game, though certainly a little less technically impressive and not the most aesthetically interesting to look at. We still go to the museum and space like we did in the PS2 version, but the order's slightly rearranged and Diablo's the first boss instead of the Mole Man. The sound effects are a bit harsh and cheap sounding, but the music's pretty catchy.
It's close.
And while the game has no voice acting outside of stuff like the Thing saying it's clobbering time or Johnny saying flame on, the writing's actually a bit funnier than the main game, with a running joke that the nurse who first sees Johnny and Ben transform keeps getting scared by them later on. Overall, you could do worse than spending a couple hours playing this version, and it being on handheld is pretty cool, but it's ultimately a shadow of the console version of the game, with way worse boss fights and not great looking levels, so this is really a deep cut type of experience for fans only. But next on our list is a game I just found out about, which is yet another movie tie-in game that came out in 2005 called Fantastic Four: Flame On. This game is a 2D side-scroller featuring only Johnny Storm as the Human Torch, not Johnny Flame. You start off battling Skrulls, which are some of my favorite villains. At first, the game feels a bit too hard as it's easy to die, but soon I got into the rhythm of throwing fireballs ahead to clear out enemies before they got close, and saving up my energy for my AoE attack or my room-clearing fire beam as needed. The game rewards quick reflexes, combos and a bit of strategy to make sure that you're saving your special attacks for when you're actually really outnumbered, and keeping your health above water so that when the next hot babe shows up to restore your health, Johnny can touch her and regain his health to keep on going. You can also save your progress mid-level on some runs, and that'll help keep the heat off you, no pun intended. Saving people from the scrolls feels a bit Duke Nukem-y, as does hitting on every woman in sight, but the music and the visual style are charming overall. What's not so charming is what Taurus Games added to the game as a palate cleanser, and those are the driving sections. The idea is that Johnny's a daredevil who loves off-roading or whatever, and that's fine, but the controls and the conveyance of how you should pull off each individual stunt is awful. The first one of these is a snowboarding race that says to get up speed you need to do tricks, and then click your action button to get some real air and presumably win the race and score more points. But every time I jumped, I fell flat on my face no matter how carefully I tried to make Johnny resume a neutral position before landing. But it turns out that all I needed to do was just push him along at normal speed and not hit any obstacles, and I'd win eventually. It's very anticlimactic and against the spirit of the tutorial, but okay. What really chapped my ass was the BMX level, where you're trying to do tricks while in midair to get a 20k score through 3 laps, but no matter what I did, I could only manage 14 to 15k, and that was because I could never get enough hang time to do more than the most basic low point tricks. The action was just getting good, so I was super sad that this was gatekeeping me from the fun part. The action doesn't evolve too much, but the action is satisfying because it rewards precise control and has some pretty sweet audio-visual feedback. Johnny even gets to take on the Dragon Man in a really intense high-speed chase through the sky. He has a knockdown drag-out duel with Terex, who's always been a favorite of mine, and he even gets an epic game-ending dust-up with Paybok the Power Scroll, who is actually a pretty big adversary of Johnny in the comics as he kills a female scroll that Johnny fell in love with. This dude's got a juicy health bar in several different stages, like this spaceship he retreats into, and I was really impressed by how a handheld game like this can make the movement feel meaningful and tactical as you evade him and line up your own attacks. Overall, while the vehicle sections are absolutely atrocious, the actual human torching that goes on in this game is surprisingly pretty to look at and pull off, and it's just a cut above your average licensed movie tie-in game to me. It's a funny game to exist, just controlling one member of the Fantastic Four, but it's a neat experiment that I think mostly paid off. Okay, well that's finally all the Fantastic Four games that released in 2005, so let's jump to the next major entry, which is the Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer. This time around, 7 Studios shares development credits with Visual Concepts, and 2K is the publisher now instead of Activision. Now, I enjoyed this game for what it was, but it does make me think that all the changing of the guard may have negatively impacted this game's ability to really be a worthwhile, innovative sequel to the surprisingly decent 2005 game. This game's got me conflicted, so let's find out why. Now for starters, the writing's not nearly as compelling. Earth's experiencing weird weather anomalies because of a massive cosmic energy spike. The Reed has tracked the source of it down to an underground lair which apparently is overrun with scrolls for some reason. So the team breaks through and helps them figuring out what's up, with the Thing doing his best SpongeBob impression.
I'm ready.
Now the cosmic energy here, of course, is the Silver Surfer, who's here on a scouting mission to tell his world-eating master Galactus to, come have dinner here. And our old pal Dr. Doom even shows up to help stave off this ensuing invasion so that he can improve his reputation and keep the world safe for his own domination of it later on. It's a good skeleton of a story, but it's not really compelling to the action on a minute-by-minute basis, and it never really seems to capitalize on any of the cool ideas that it has. Not nearly as much as the first game does, anyway. That said, I do appreciate some of the comic book references here, like the classic Super Skrull, who's been engineered to have all the abilities of the Fantastic Four. Now, why he's a giant here, I'll never know, but his boss battle is smartly designed, and it's fun to see him disappear like Sue does to get away from us when we've done too much damage to him. Now, Terex shows up here too, also as a giant for some reason, and we have to engage this puzzle where we knock some pillars around to solve a light puzzle to weaken him. We also get a really good deep cut from the comics and Soviet bad boy the Red Ghost and his band of genetically engineered super apes. Now if you know me and my love of King Kong, you know how much I love a good gorilla, so this brought me great joy. One thing I'm really sad about in the new movie is that they actually cut out the Red Ghost character who is being played by John Malkovich. Now if you want to get me to sign up for a movie, give me John Malkovich and give me John Malkovich doing a bad accent. I'm there all day, every day. Now just think of John Malkovich delivering lines like the Red Ghost does here, where he trolls the Thing for having a dumb name.
Red Ghost? Dude, you gotta get a better name than that.
Perhaps we should ask Thing for his opinion.
Red Ghost works for me.
Another really enjoyable line delivery is late game when Ben asks if Reed likes elevator music.
I miss elevator music. Don't you, Stretch?
No, Ben. It's a derivative bastardization of classical music.
Next time, stop it. No.
The game's story is listless in many ways, but there is a lot of good repartee between the team members, and it kept me rooting for the game even when its plot wasn't really doing anything for me. As for its visuals, the textures are night and day from the 2005 game, and I really like what they've done with Sue and especially The Thing. The music mixing is a little low, but there are some actually pretty decent tracks throughout, and the sound effects are mostly solid, though the combat sounds lack punch. In fact, a lot of the combat lacks punch, no pun intended. So, unlike its predecessor, Rise of the Silver Surfer lets you switch between all 4 members of the team at almost any time outside of their occasional solo sections. The Fantastic Four have light and heavy attacks as they did in the 2005 game, but there aren't really combos anymore, or at least ones that matter or flash their names on the screen like the first games did. They don't really seem to do any different types of damage, just different animations. Light attacks, for instance, are literally the same animations as heavy attacks, but they do less damage, so guess which one I'm using. Enemies also show very little feedback from getting hit, they just kind of glow, and the punch sounds are super wimpy. On the higher of the 2 difficulties called Fantastic, enemies can take up to 4 or 5 punch combos and they fall down after every one of them, so it takes forever to beat anyone down, you have to wait for them to get back up every time. And since every enemy has to be defeated in order for you to be able to move on, this can make fights just drag on with no real rhythm. You can't grapple anymore and there's no block button. To account for this, each character now has a shield ability that takes up energy, and 3 other abilities. The Thing can supercharge its attacks for a short time or do a shockwave. Mr. Fantastic can spin attack, throw grenades, or do a high swinging punch that can knock out flying enemies, of which there are very few, or activate out of the way parts of the level. Johnny can flamethrow and throw fireballs in addition to a flying ability that lasts such a short time that it's really just a jump to get to places other characters can't. And Sue Storm can throw invisible frisbees, or invisbees. She can throw things around with telekinesis to solve puzzles or toss enemies off ledges. Like the first game, you can upgrade your guys at any time if you've earned enough currency by defeating bad guys and breaking up environmental objects for coins. Unfortunately, you really can't upgrade more than 1 character fully in a single playthrough, and I only got the Thing fully upgraded and the Torch maybe 1/3 of the way there, with some very light upgrading of Sue and Reed with the quote-unquote extra points I had. But this was mostly just because from the very outset, the Thing and the Torch are so much better than the other 2 are, so you'd expect that even if you upgraded them all the same, that the gap between them would still exist. The Thing is just way too powerful and durable, and the Torch's fireball attack is so good at hitting bosses from afar. Unfortunately, because the game doesn't let you lock on anymore either, you're just wildly firing projectiles hoping that the auto-aim works for Sue and Johnny and praying to God that the Greed's grenades find their target. So the game devolved into me using the Thing almost exclusively again. I'm not complaining, as he's my favorite, but I'd like a lot more incentive to play the other characters. Whereas Reed's spinning attack was really powerful in the first game, and his spider bots could clear out a room once upgraded, here he's just a flimsy weakling who gets his shit pushed in a lot, and the same goes for Sue, who doesn't even have that gnarly kick combo she did in the first game, and doesn't have enough defense or offense to make much of a difference. Her telekinesis is far more trouble than it's worth since it doesn't control very well and does very little damage. There aren't very many ways to abuse it either for free kills, when you can throw a guy over a ledge. So, the Thing's ability to deal tons of damage with his long-ranging shockwave attack just becomes the thing that you spam over and over again. You hit the most enemies, does the most damage, and it's essentially a ranged attack. And once you upgrade your cosmic energy so that it regenerates pretty much as soon as you're done doing your last attack, you can just use this attack with impunity, recharging yourself over and over again. Now, could this approach work just as well with every other character if I'd maxed them out instead? I'm not ruling it out, but judging from their base stats and the fact that none of their abilities have the same ability to be both AoE and ranged at the same time like the Thing, that it's unlikely that they even hold a candle to him. I'm just aghast at how stripped down the combo system is here, and how nerfed each character is, so you really have to just build up one character that you're controlling that'll actually, turn the tides in your favor, so they won't just get cut down like your AI teammates tend to do. But that brings me to the game's revival system, which is actually a really cool addition. The game only ends when all the team members go down at once, and as long as you've got one of you alive, any other downed teammate is just on a timer and will eventually revive once that time limit is up. That time limit can be greatly reduced too if you invest in their revival time in the skill tree. Now, no one likes dying or retrying, so this keeps the danger up without constantly making you restart the game. And you won't want to restart very often because holy crap are the levels repetitive and the checkpoints can be 15 to 20 minutes apart.
Whoa! Hold up, hotshot!
Hey!
Now, admittedly, I only really died a couple times even on the max difficulty, but I couldn't just stop whenever I wanted to either, as I had to make sure I'd hit a checkpoint before shutting my Xbox 360 down. Now, some of these are crazy far apart, which I really don't understand for a 2007 game, but what can you do? But again, if the combat were that good, replaying these sections wouldn't hurt as bad, but it's just too repetitive. The level design is just not simply, is Can I say words today? The level design is just simply not interesting enough for how long you trudge along through them. The 2005 game had some boring areas like the jungle or the museum, but they had some zany charm to them. You had mummies or spiders or golems or whatever to fight. But here, you're often just hitting robots or gorillas over and over and over through long generic hallways and flipping switches or going up elevators otherwise. It's just incredibly uninspired. Now, the levels might not have to be interesting if they just played interestingly, but again, they're extremely biased towards the thing and nobody else. There are interactable boxes and debris lying around, but only the thing can throw them or use them as melee weapons. And they do very little damage outside of this inexplicably indestructible tree that I picked up after these aliens crashed Sue and Reed's wedding. The thing also has the most instances of being able to influence the environment to progress, whereas the Invisible Woman will only occasionally need to use her force fields to deflect a light beam to solve a puzzle, or the Human Torch might need to boost over an obstacle to get to the other side. The other team members get their own levels here and there, but suspiciously, the thing doesn't, almost as if they knew that people were going to be using him exclusively in the main gameplay. Unfortunately, these solo sections aren't very good. Torches are hilariously straightforward and easy, essentially just letting you hold forward in a straight line to catch the surfer or some other type of chase function. The Mr. Fantastic level has you trying to nail a circuit box with a grenade while going down an elevator, and with no ability to aim, this took quite a bit longer than I'd like to admit. The Invisible Woman has the worst level in the game, where she has to use her incredibly small energy pool to sneak past cameras and droids, and then use her telekinesis without getting seen or running out of energy, which led to constant reloads as the controls bugged out or I ran out of resources. Again, anytime the game gets away from the thing, it gets massively less fun. Then there's some other frustrating things going on like the last level, which is a painfully boring slog that caps in a lame Dr. Doom fight. Despite being in Shanghai, we only get some twangy Eastern music and a bunch of ads in English for some reason, and we fight some enemies that we can barely see over and over for city street after city street until we face Dr. Doom on a surfboard, which was admittedly kind of funny once I realized this actually wasn't just the creative team going crazy, but something actually from the comics. The fight itself is preposterously easy, though I just hope your game doesn't lock up like it did to me and make me replay the entire level. Once he's down, you get a very brief send-off of the Silver Surfer, who's barely in a game that bears his name, and then we see actual zero of his boss Galactus, which is crazy considering how underdone he was in the accompanying movie, as he's basically just a hungry shadow instead of the giant badass that he is in the comics and in the upcoming Fantastic Four movie. It's kind of wild how much of a wet fart the ending comes out to. Okay, so that was like a lot of negative criticism I just leveled at this game, and yet I said at the outset that I was conflicted about it.
That makes sense, in a weird kind of way.
In many ways, it is an outright regression from the 2005 game. Sure, it looks better, it, I guess, controls a little bit less stiffly, but the combat lacks a lot of the depth and feedback of the previous game. The levels are much more generic and repetitive looking, and the story is forgettable. And yet, I found myself having a good time playing something simple but easily engaged from the early aughts. A simpler time. Sometimes a game can just let you blast through it and kind of beat up on it for an admittedly short 5 to 6 hours, even on its hardest difficulty, and if you're just beating up supervillains with some cool powers and calling it a day, it can just be refreshing to have some dumb fun that doesn't try to take over your life, and just lets me imagine that I'm my favorite super team, with some witty banter, and some fan service, like Ben running around in 60s era's underoos. Wait until I tell his dear Aunt Petunia. So, Rise of the Silver Surfer is never great, and sometimes it's not nearly as good as it should be, but it is a serviceable little weekend game that I think fans can enjoy. And if you're feeling frisky, you could also mess around with the Rise of the Silver Surfer DS version, but this one got lambasted in the gaming press. As it stands, I kind of enjoy the Human Torch's linear fireball throwing sections, or how the Invisible Woman could somehow fly around everywhere by making little hover pads for herself. I also liked how Reed's levels were all switch flipping and platforming puzzles. Now I can't say the boss fights are particularly fantastic, as they're essentially like playing Pong, but at least this game has an actual factual Galactus boss battle in it, so if there's no other reason to play this game for the hour or two that it'll take you, that's reason enough for me, including these nice little comic book interludes to tell what accounts for its story. Certainly no Revelation is an interactive experience, but it's a cool little novelty for the nerds. And that marks the last major entry of Fantastic Four titled games. And that's too bad, because I think the Rogues Gallery and long history is incredibly fertile ground for super fun stories. But the good news is that the Fantastic Four, probably due in large part to the fact that they're already working as a team and they're kind of down for anything, they work very well as guest stars in other big-name Marvel games. I don't really know any other group of heroes that have as little ego about who they are and where they fit into things. It's kind of amazing how no writer that I've seen really betrays the sense that the Fantastic Four are just what superheroes should be. Selfless, believably flawed, yet family-oriented, good-hearted, and willing to give their all for their fellow man, and they're just really down for whatever comes up. They're perfectly complementary in their skills and personalities, and their adventures are so diverse and exciting without losing sight of the people they are, unlike how the Avengers of the Justice League can be when it just becomes all about the plot or the spectacle. That's a hard thing to balance, and it's why the Fantastic Four will live on even if they regrettably don't have any games dedicated to them. Much like Superman, despite not having a game for them since the late aughts, they still have been duly honored in their guest appearances even as late as the recent Marvel Rivals game, which was actually extremely fun to play. Also, fun fact, I fired this game up today in order to get some footage, and somehow I got a 15 kill streak with the Invisible Woman in my 4th match ever. Somehow, I got a 15 kill streak with the Invisible Woman in my 4th match ever, and I had a grudge match against a Thing player on the other team who was more than willing to lean into the drama of us teammates facing off against each other. And yes, I did get the better of him many times, but it was a great rivalry. Anyway, fun anecdotes aside, I can't say that the Fantastic Four games have been legendary or anything, but they're a bit more consistently decent than, say, Superman games have been. So I don't feel left out as a fan per se, though I'm surprised at the drop-off in quality between the 2005 and the 2007 game. Still, even the 2007 game is a reasonable little jaunt for what it is, and if you wanted to go back and play the 1997 game, you could do worse. I'm just pleased as punch that there are so many great adaptations of the team out there like the LEGO Marvel game or the Marvel Ultimate Alliance games, just to name a few. And who knows? Maybe one day, if the First Steps movie just goes off, we can go from an entertainment industry that won't stop oversaturating the market with crappy content and go back to the fun trend we used to do where we made crappy licensed movie tie-in games. I think that'd just be fantastic.
Great work, team.
It seems the world can sleep easy once again.
Yeah, till the next wacko tries to blow it up.
Yeah, but that's why we're here. The greatest superhero team in the world. The Fantastic Four!
Thanks for watching, and I really appreciate you being here to celebrate the Fantastic Four for the 4-year anniversary of this channel. Hope you've enjoyed the ride. There's plenty more to come. So, if you're enjoying the channel and really want to help it get to the next level, please consider becoming a patron or a channel member. By doing so, you'll be shouted out in the credits of every video, get early access to new videos, receive game keys as available, and even be able to vote on or contribute to upcoming projects. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, these people thought so, and I have to thank them for their generous support. Starting with Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Hey Blondie, Yaksho, M, Bibby F. and Bloxburg, Melancholy Geek, Gara Sun, and Luke Dudney. Thanks for signing on. I really appreciate it. And an extra special shout out to James Wyatt and the Nth Review for contributing to my highest tiers. And if you're not tired of me by now, go ahead and check me out on the Quad Damage podcast, where I'm joined by Deadforge and Robert Yap as we talk first-person games with developers, gaming personalities, and content creators alike. God bless you, everyone, and I'll see you soon.